The Rebbe Zilkes began the Farbrengen this afternoon that this Shabbos comes into continuation to Chav Cheshvan, which was this Thursday, which is the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab Nishmas HaYedin. And based on what Chazal tell us, that on one's birthday, Mazloi Goiver, that is when his Mazel strengthens, gains strength. And if we are talking here about the Yom Heledes, about the birthday of someone who is a Nasi B'Yisrael, and based on what Rashi teaches us, and if it's mentioned in Rashi, this means that it applies to everyone that even a 5-year-old child is aware of it. Rashi in Chumash tells us, Hanasi hu hakoil, that a Nasi is equivalent to all of Klal Yisrael. Memela, it means that a Nasi has shaychus to all of Klal Yisrael. So when we're talking about the birthday of a Nasi B'Yisrael, which was just a few days ago, Chav Cheshvan, and a birthday brings out the fact of one's mazel gaining strength. So in this particular case, it does not only apply to the one whose birthday it was on Chav Cheshvan. In other words, it does not only apply to the Rebbe Rashab, to the Rebbe Nishmas HaYedin, but it applies to everyone who has a shaychus to him. That by everyone who has a shaychus to the Rebbe Rashab, we say Mazloi Goiver, that his mazel gains strength as a result of his birthday of Chav Cheshvan. Especially that we are in a period that we're that close still to Chav Cheshvan, and we know that the union of 3 days has a very strong shaychus, as we just read in last week's Sedre, that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to visit Avraham Avinu, he came on the 3rd day, Lemiloseh, on the 3rd day after he was circumcised. Same thing we find Benegeya, one being Maveh Sedre, that if he wasn't Maveh Sedre on Shabbos, he can do so until 3 days after Shabbos. What does all this show us? All of this shows us that a 3-day period, still the days in between have a shaychus one to another. This is Benegeya 3 days. We know that from Wednesday on, one can be, we say in the Shir Shel Yoim, we already recite the small Lechuna Ranana. That at the end of the Wednesday Shir Shel Yoim, we have the small Lechuna Ranana. That means that as of Wednesday, we begin preparing to Shabbos. If Chav Cheshvan fell out to be not on Wednesday, but Chav Cheshvan was Thursday, which is only 2 days ago, so therefore the inyanim that have transpired on Chav Cheshvan have a very close shaychus to the Shabbos. And here when the Rebbe was talking about how the mazel is goiver on a Yom Heledes, which means that one keeps on going from madrege to madrege, this is actually what it means. One's mazel gains strength so that one can have a spiritual elevation. The Rebbe said we find in the various parts of the inyanim which the Rebbe has created in the world, which generally is divided into daimim, tzemeach, chai, and medaber. So actually we find the concept of growth by all of them. But definitely we cannot compare the concept of growth as it is in a tzemeach as opposed to the way it is in chai or in medaber. Because when tzemeach grows, itaka grows, but we know a tzemeach cannot go from place to place. It has to stand in its place. And where it is, unless it'll be cut off, that is how it grows. However, when we are talking about a chai, and a medaber who is yet higher than chai, so their growth is in a much different way. Here we are talking about the growth of Yidden, and Yidden that are within this sect of medaber, within the group of medaber, Yidden are the highest of medaber. The Yidden are the Am Segula, the chosen nation which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has chosen. The Am HaNifcha, this is what Yidden are. So here we find how Yidden, who are the highest part of the creation, we are told that on an inyan of a Yom Heledes brings about an inyan of Mazloi Goiver, that one's mazel gains strength and therefore brings about and calls for a spiritual elevation by the one whose birthday it is, and in this particular case, not only by the one whose birthday it is, but being that we're talking about a Nasi, everyone that has a shaychus to him. Here the Rebbe mentioned, talking about the various levels, how we find the levels in the world of Daimim, Tzameach, Chayim, Medaber, we find the same thing amongst Klal Yisrael. There's also a division. There's the division of Kohen Levi in Yisrael. However, it's brought in Svarim, the the Rebbe went on, that, for an example, a Levi or a Kohen, he has the Levi, the additional fact within him that he is a Levi, which is a plus. However, he is also a Yisrael. In other words, in addition to him being a Yisrael, he is also a Levi. Or in addition to him being a Yisrael meaning a Yid in the sense, he's also a Kohen. So the Chazarah explains that this is the dialogue between Korach and Moshe. Korach pikachaya, the Gemara tells us. Korach was a very smart person. What was Korach's argument? Korach's argument was, Kol ha'eda kulam kedoshim, everyone is holy. Umadua tisnasu al kal Hashem. And why are you claiming that you are higher than everybody else? What was Korach's taina, the Ragachava claims? Korach's taina was regarding the Yisrael that is within every Yid. So the Levi also there's the Yisrael Shebe Levi, there's the Yisrael Shebe Kohen. So Korach was claiming that the Yisrael that is within the Levi is not any holier, not any different than the Yisrael and any other Yid. And this was Chayei Sarah. Why? Because being that we're talking about a chosen person, whether it is a Kohen or a Levi, so the Yisrael that is within him is also higher than the Yisrael that is within another Yid, than the Yisrael of another Yid. So, the Rebbe just brought this in, how we find the same type of a chalukah amongst Yidden also. We find various madreges, and within the madreges, we find how one madrege blends in with the other. And the same thing in the world bichlal we also have. We have how the doimim tzameach, the division of doimim tzameach, chai and medaber, and we have also in each one of them how they blend one with another. We have within tzameach, there's a chai shebet tzameach, and so forth, as it is explained in Chassidus at length. What does this inyan of the Yemeletus of the Rebbe Rashab mean to us in the sense of a hayra, of a lesson, what we can derive from this? So Bichlal we know that the Rambam writes that whatever a Yid does, a Chacham, the Rambam uses the expression, a Chacham is niker b'ma'asov. Whatever he acts, in all his acts, it is noticeable that this is a Chacham. And the Rambam explains, ba'achilosoi, ubishtiyosoi, when he eats, when he drinks, when he sleeps, it is always obvious that this person who is eating or sleeping or drinking or whatever he may be doing, these are the acts of a Chacham. And the Rebbe explained, naturally, if we're talking about a Chacham, definitely he will not eat in a way of a Zayl v'Seiva. This is definitely not proper for a Chacham to eat that way. And the same thing b'negei drinking. B'negei sleeping as well. The sleeping of a Yid, as Rabbi explained, the Yid goes to sleep with a krishme shalamita. That's how the Yid ends his day, and that's what he does before him going to sleep. And how does a Yid rise in the morning? He rises in the morning with a maidani. And this is what we find regarding the Rebbe Rashab. We do not know much of the various personal hanhagas of the Rabbeim. However, of the little that was revealed to us, we know that the Rebbe Rashab, when he was a child of 12 years old, it was said about him that he got his body used to, in other words, he trained his guf, that his guf should act accordingly as it is required al pi Shulchan Aruch. In other words, he trained himself that something which is wrong he will not do. His body got used to do only things which are proper and the right things which are to be done according to Shulchan Aruch. So this is what the Rebbe Rashab stands for. And when we are looking what to take a lesson from this day of Chav Cheshvan, what is the hero that we can walk away with from the Rebbe Rashab's birthday? It is to walk away with this type of an idea that whatever we do in all our Gashmis Dikinyonim, in all our acts throughout the day, whether it is the eating, the sleeping, and whatever we are involved in throughout day and night, whatever Yid comes in contact with, we should follow the lesson, the symbol which the Rebbe Rashab has said, that he trained his body that it should be noticeable and obvious that he's only doing things in accordance to the Shulchan Aruch, and not any different. Here the Rebbe also began talking that the Rebbe Rashab was the one who told us about the greatness of Afatzas HaMayonis, about spreading Chasidus. And therefore, Ashrei chelkom v'godel schusam. How great is the merit in the schus. And praised are those who are fortunate to have a hand and be involved in the inyan of Afatzas HaMayonos. The Rebbe spoke at length about the greatness of the reward for those who are really involved in the inyan of Afatzas HaMayonos. The second Sikha, the Rebbe began that there are many inyanim which we want, which are negeya to us, we try to remember them. And inyanim which we feel we do not pay that much attention to, and are not that significant to us, we usually bypass them and we don't pay attention to these inyanim. Rebbe says, why is he saying all this? Rebbe says it was just Chav Cheshvan. And we know about the greatness of the day, as we just explained, and as explained in the Farbrengen of Wednesday night. Rebbe says it would have been very proper for all of us, even though he did not mention it, and as he recalls, he did not mention it last year either, but still it would have been the most appropriate thing and the most proper thing that we should all have contributed a certain amount of money for tzedakah for this great day. Rebbe says he did not hear and he did not notice. Maybe there were a few exceptions, but other than that, he did not come across, it wasn't brought to his attention that people contributed for tzedakah because of this day of Chav Cheshvan. Rebbe says everybody took part in the Farbrengen, and those, after the Farbrengen went home, were those that got involved into their usual routine things. There were some of us, the Rebbe says, who were at the Farbrengen even before Sapa. So when they came home, they had to have their Sapa. And the Rebbe says, Sapa v'Yid can be compared to the Korban Tamid, which was brought in the Beis HaMikdash, the Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim, the evening Tamid, especially based on the fact that the Gemara tells us that a Jewish table is compared to a Mizbeach. So our table is a Mizbeach. Or there are even those who, after the Farbrengen, were busy with reviewing, chazering over what was discussed in the Farbrengen. However, still no one thought of the importance of contributing for tzedakah due to this special day of Chav Cheshvan. The Rebbe says we know that there is a magvis, there is a tzedakah campaign which the Rebbe has on Chayei. On other occasions, we know we give tzedakah Erev Rosh Hashanah, we know we give tzedakah Erev Yom Kippur, but it didn't dawn on any one of us to give tzedakah on this day of Chav Cheshvan. He says, so for the birthday of the Alter Rebbe, which is Chayei, we know to give tzedakah. But for the birthday of his great-grandson, which is on Chav Cheshvan, the Rebbe says, here we did not have the understanding that we have to go ahead and make a contribution of tzedakah for this day. And while talking about this inyan, Rebbe Bechlal spoke about the greatness of tzedakah. The Rebbe says, let us think for a moment. There's an inyan whereby one is told that he can take a cent, or more than a cent, and just put it aside. And the question is, what is going to happen with it? Will he lose it? Will he have a small reward, small return on this money? Or will he have a very large return on this money? So we are told that the Rebishter tells us, Uvchanuni no bezois, meaning that the Rebishter says that he gives us permission that we shall test him with giving tzedakah. In other words, a Yid is allowed, the Gemara tells us like this, one is not allowed to test the Rebishter when he fulfills a mitzvah. However, regarding tzedakah, a Yid is allowed to take a sum of money and say that he's giving this sum of money for tzedakah and he's waiting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to respond to him. So the Rebbe says this is a mitzvah, a unique thing whereby HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us permission and told us, Uvchanuni no bezois, he instructed us to do so. So the reward for this cent which one is putting aside for tzedakah is going to be a reward, and no comparison the return will be, and no comparison to what he's investing. And the return will be reflected in all inyanim. It will be reflected in bana, chaya, mezayna, revicha, and all inyanim, children, health, parnasa. So we definitely can understand the greatness and the importance of tzedakah. Besides, that we know that when it comes to tzedakah, we're obligated to give tzedakah, the fact that one is supposed to give ma'isa of his earnings. The Rebbe says that Meiser is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch. It is also discussed regarding to chaimish, which means not only a tenth, but a fifth, 20% of one's earnings. The Rebbe mentioned that it is brought in Shulchan Aruch that a while ago, this was only a minhag, which some used to act according to this minhag, and give 20% of their earnings for tzedakah. However, nowadays the Rebbe says it is brought, according to many poskim, that it is an obligation, that it is not only meiser that one is supposed to give, but it is a chaimish, it is 20% of one's earning, which one is mechuyev to give for tzedakah. So here we see the greatness of tzedakah. One should not be a hatzna leches, meaning he's going to say he does his things, but he doesn't want people to know about it. And therefore his shiurim, his learning in Torah, is in the way of hatzna leches. In other words, he doesn't want nobody to know that he learns and when he learns. And his giving of tzedakah as such. This, the Rebbe says, is wrong. Very simple. Because if one is a hatzna leches, let us say b'negei k'fi yisitim in Torah. So when one participates in a shia, if he will miss out on the shia, the other participants in the shia will call on him and remind him, where were you? And therefore, this will bring him that he has to take part in the shia. However, when one is going to tell us that he's learning, but how does he learn Torah? He learns Torah in a hatzna lechastik way. He learns Torah hidden so that nobody should know. He doesn't want anybody to know that he learns. The Rebbe says the results of such type of learning is very obvious. And the same thing when it comes to tzedakah as well. Rather, let it be known that he gives tzedakah, but it'll reach the poor person. And when it reaches the poor person will have Chayei Sarah, he has brought life to the soul of the poor. And therefore, we know that he's fulfilling the mitzvah of tzedakah. And to rely on one being hatzna leches, one trying to say that he's going to do it in a way that he doesn't want nobody to know about it, this is not the right derech. While talking about the sin, the Rebbe says it's brought in Svarim that when a poor person receives his bread in charity, how can he go ahead and bench and he's thanking the Rebishter, for the Rebishter is the one that is feeding him. In benching we say that we're expressing thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he's thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom for feeding him. He received his feeding, obviously, through the individual who gave him the food, or gave him the contribution. So the Rebbe says, the truth is that, as it's explained in Svarim, this person is watching a pekadon, he's watching something for the Rebbeinu Shalom. In other words, the Rebbeinu Shalom is channeling to this person via this other person who's in the meantime fulfilling the mitzvah of tzedakah. It doesn't mean that it was given to the other person that it should be his. It is given to the other person, the Rebbe is giving it to him, to the wealthier person, so that he should be able at the same time to also fulfill a mitzvah and give tzedakah to the poor. But whose is it really? In essence, it really belongs to the poor person who is getting it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu really intended it for him. And even if one should go ahead at a later and do tshuva for not giving tzedakah, we know by Gzeila, when does a tshuva help? Tshuva in itself is not enough. It has to be v'heishav v'sagzeila. He has to return what he has stolen. The same thing here. If one should do tshuva for not giving tzedakah, what's the pshat he's doing tshuva for not giving tzedakah? He has to give the money to tzedakah. Otherwise, it's not considered doing tshuva. So the same. So here the Rebbe spoke in general about the greatness of tzedakah, how outstanding the mitzvah of tzedakah is, and that one should not be a hatzna leches, claiming that he's doing all these things hiddenly, he doesn't want anyone to know about it. On the contrary, there's a quotation from the Mittel Rebbe, a Yiddish quotation from the Mittel Rebbe, which the Rebbe mentioned, whereby the Mittel Rebbe once told somebody, "A Zibbele soll von dir werden, aber Chassidus sollst du chazern." In other words, turn into an onion, which is the Zibbele. In other words, you got to put yourself aside totally. Don't think about yourself. Main thing what you got to do is Chassidus sollst du chazern. If one is in a position that he can share Chassidus with somebody else, and he's going to make various calculations that he wants to remain hidden, and he doesn't want to, people should know that he knows Chassidus to share with others, and so forth, this is the wrong attitude. This is what the Mittel Rebbe told them. Turn into an onion. We don't care about you. The main thing which we are concerned about is as Chassidus sollst du chazern. If one is in a position to relate Chassidus to others, he has to go ahead and do it. Later in the Farbrengen, As usual, the Rebbe discussed an Indian in this week's Parsha, also a Zohar on this week's Sedre. And also mentioned regarding the Rambam that has a shaykhis to today's Shia. In the Zohar we find the Zohar beginning with Chayei Sarah. The Zohar refers to the entire incident that has taken place with Yaina, which we recite in the Haftarah of Yom Kippur. And he brings the whole Maisa of Yaina. And as the Rebbe always says when he quotes a Zohar with the commentaries from his father, the Rebbe says, what we have to look at is the Hirah in Avodah. What do we derive? What kind of lesson in Avodah Hashem could we take from this whole lineage? And therefore the Rebbe says, what is the Hirah which we can derive from the story of Yaina? In the Farbrengen, the Rebbe mentioned several points which we can take as a lesson from the Sipur of Yaina. First of all, we see what has happened here. Yaina went onto the boat, and all the problems began on the boat. Why were all these problems? All these problems were due to one Yaina. In other words, there were many, many people on the boat. There was the boat, and there were all the people who were the crew who was in charge of the boat, and Yaina, and many other people. And then Yaina realized, Bishali hara hazois. He realized that he is the cause that has brought all of these problems onto the boat. What does this show us? This shows us, the Rebbe says, what he always mentions, the Rambam. The Rambam tells us how one act of one Yid, one single act of a person, can be machriya es atzmoi ves koloi lam kuloi, can have an effect on the individual person and on the entire world. In other words, one act, it is like a scale, and one single act of a person can weigh down the scale one way or another. Here we find the same by Yaina. It's one act, he ran away, of one individual person, and it had an effect. It made a Sarah, it made a storm in the water, and hundreds of people were in danger, and the entire crew was in danger, and the boat was in danger, all because of whom? Bishali hara hazois. Yaina came to the realization that why is all this happening? All of this is happening because of him. Further, the Rebbe explained, based on what Chassidus teaches us, that the concept of water bichlal, is explained in Torah and in Chassidus, in many places, that there is the idea of mayim rabim. There's a very strong flow of waters. What is the strong flow of waters? Chassidus stresses, this is the daigas haparnasa, the worries of parnasa which each and every person goes through. And these worries have an effect on us, naturally. And it comes like a strong stormy waters. Chassidus ties it in based on a pasuk, Mayim rabim lo yuchlu lachabeis es ahava. That all of these strong and stormy waters of the daigas haparnasa, which each and every one of us go through, cannot lesh ois, cannot put an end, chas v'shalom, to the ahava, to the great love and association which each and every Yid has with the Eibishter. Memela, here in the whole idea of Yaina, we are taught that there are stormy waters. There is a Sa'ara of waters, very stormy waters. And these stormy waters are trying to have an effect on the Aniyah, on the boat. What is the boat? The boat, this is Torah mitzvahs. Torah mitzvahs, which this is the boat. In other words, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us as a vessel to be able to exist, to go through the world. Memela, we have the Aniyah, we have this boat, which is Torah mitzvahs, which we are traveling with throughout the world. However, at the same time, we know that there are stormy waters which are trying to destroy the boat. And what are we told? That we have to know how to act accordingly to be able to salvage, to save the boat, and not to let the stormy waters have an effect on the boat that the boat should break, that the boat should get broken. The Rebbe also mentioned that the king who Yaina was heading to was Pari. That's what it's brought. That was a Pari Melech Mitzrayim. And it was a Pari Melech Mitzrayim, we know initially did not believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But here throughout all these circumstances, Pari also came to a realization of the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what is brought in Medrash. Memela, this is the whole inyan of the Hayroah B'Poyel, which we can derive from the whole Parsha of Yoina, which we read in the Maftir of Yoina, which we are told about in Yoina. But again, the Rashi in this week's Sedra, the Rebbe raised questions on a pasuk, first pasuk right after Shishi. Pasuk in Chayei Sarah tells us, "Vayosef Avram vayikach isha ushmo Keturah." Avram went ahead and married a woman by the name of Keturah. Rashi comments that it's really Hagar. And the pasuk goes on, "Vateled loy," and what did she gave birth to 6 sons. Where are we really up to? It is after the Akedah, after Yitzchak got married. Yitzchak got married at what age? At an age of 40. How old was Avram when Yitzchak got married? Avram was 140 years old. What did Avram do at the age of 140? He married. He married to a woman by the name of Keturah, as the pasuk tells us. And she gave birth. They had 6 children. What's happening? Avram, at the age of 140, is becoming a father to 6 children. Just a week ago, in Vayera, we read in detail when HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised Avram that he will have a child, Avram and Sarah, that they will have a child. What was that? And we find that the Psukim make a whole tumult that Vatitzchak Sarah bekirba. Sarah laughed. They were old people. The pasuk tells us Avram v'Sarah zkenim, ba'im ba'yamim, chad aliyas l'Sarah erech kanosh. Then the pasuk goes ahead. Vatitzchak Sarah bekirba, leima achi b'loisi haisel yedna. How is it possible that she will have children? She was already a woman of 90 years old, and she also added on va'adoini zaken, and her husband, her master, is old. Vayomer Hashem el Avram, lama zetzachak Sarah. Why did Sarah laugh? Is it impossible? Definitely, the Rebbe will make that within a year they will have a child. Up to a year, the child will be born. What do we see? That there was a whole big commotion when Avram was the age of 100, and Sarah was at the age of 90, and they were promised that they will have a child. Pasuk makes a tremendous issue of what's going to happen. Here, Avram is not 100 years old, but Avram is how much? 140 years old. And he has not 1 child, he's having 6 children. And the pasuk does not make any comment whatsoever of something unusual happening here. Pasuk tells us just information. What has Avram done? Vayosef Avram, vayikach isha shmo Keturah, and she gave birth to 6 children. Avram was 140 years old when this happened. So when Avram was 100, Sarah claimed Adoni Zaken. How is it possible for an old master to have children? He's an 100-year-old man. But when he was 140 years old, he had not only 1 child, he had 6 children. The pasuk makes no issue, no specialty is mentioned of what's happening. And the pasuk tells it to us as a fact that Avram married to a woman by the name of Keturah, and they had 6 children. Rabbi explained, and Rashi, who is Pshutish al Mikra, who should have commented right away and tell us something, Rashi doesn't say a word. Is a siman, means we must say that al pi pshat, there is no need for Rashi to comment anything. And with what Rashi has commented until now, whatever is happening here is self-explanatory, and there's no need for Rashi to explain anything. So the Rebbe is learning. We read before that Avram and Sarah made a big party. B'yoyim higomer es Yitzchak, vayigdal hayeled vayigomer in Parshas Vayera, vayas Avram mishte godel, b'yoyim higomer es Yitzchak. And we read in Rashi, based on the pasuk, Vatoimer mimile laAvram heinika bonim Sarah, that Sarah was nursing children. So Rashi comments, what is the pshat? She was nursing children. She was only nursing one child, her son Yitzchak. So Rashi tells us that on this day of this big party, of this big feast, Heviu hasarais as b'nei nimon, everyone brought their sons with them. Vehinika Isa, and Sarah was capable of not only nursing her own child, but she nursed all the infants of the dignitaries who came to participate in this big party. Shahayu Imrais LaYolda Sarah LaSufi. People were denying the fact that Sarah gave birth to a child. She only picked up she picked up a baby somewhere which was not the one that she gave birth to. So therefore, to prove the fact that she was still in a position of giving birth, and she was a young mother, she was a nursing mother, all other dignitaries brought along their children, and Sarah was nursing all of them. The Rebbe explained, why did all this happen? Because Rashi tells us that on the day when Sarah gave birth to Yitzchak, in that period of time, not only was it an individual help, an individual Yeshua, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed Avram and Sarah, that they were blessed with a child Yitzchak, but all the Akaras in the world at that time were blessed. In other words, it was a simcha which HaKadosh Baruch Hu turned from an individual simcha to a simcha which had an effect on the entire world. And this is why the Rebbe says, that's why we can understand better why everybody brought their infants to Sarah, that Sarah should nurse them, because this expresses how the birth of all of these other children who were born by the Akaris of that time had a shaykhus to Sarah. In other words, it is through Sarah, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu made this unusual miracle, that Sarah had a child, at the same time all the other Akaras of that generation also had a child. So Sarah was nursing the children who were blessed, who were born because of the blessing which came into the world due to her. However, there's another question which still remains. Question still remains, which Rashi himself brings, that the Litzonei Hadoyer, the people who were making jokes and laughing, were saying, true, Sarah had a baby, but how do we know that the child is from Avram? Maybe Avimelech nesabra Sarah. Maybe Sarah turned pregnant from someone else. Maybe it was from Avimelech. And this question is not answered yet. So the Rabbeinu Shalom showed many years later that not only did this have an impact on Sarah, but also on Avram. Avram v'Adoni Zaken, she claimed Avram is old, right? So here HaKadosh Baruch Hu was showing us that to answer the question, perhaps Avimelech nesabra Sarah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu was showing us that Avram Avinu is in a position not only then, but even 40 years later, when Avram was at the age of 140, Avram was in a position of marrying a woman by the name of Keturah, and they gave birth to, she had 6 children. This shows us that, in other words, that Avraham Avinu was definitely the father of Yitzchak. Not only that, even 40 years later, he was still in a position of having children. Memela, there's no need for Rashi to explain anything particular over here. It all comes behemshich to what has happened in the previous Sedra. We are now beginning to read Toildes. Now that when we begin reading Toildes, we know Toildes Yitzchak ben Avram Heilis Yitzchak. So Rashi comments that the cluster panav shel Yitzchak, the face of Yitzchak, was similar to Avram. Therefore, it was obvious for everyone to know that Yitzchak is Avram's child. However, until now, the pasuk didn't say that, and Rashi didn't mention it. This is something which a child will first learn about in Parshas Toildes. Now that we're learning Parshas Chayei Sarah, so it fits in as a hemshich to Parshas Vayera to tell us that Avram was stuck in a position of having children. Avram was, though Sarah claimed V'adoni Zaken, so Avram was the father of Yitzchak, and not only that, even 40 years later, he was the father of 6 more children. In today's Shir of Rambam, in accordance to the Rambam on 3 Prakim a day, we learn about Parah Aduma. The Parah Aduma, which was made, as we read in Parshas Chukas, it is composed mainly of 2 items. It is composed of the Eifer Parah, the ashes of the Parah Aduma. In other words, the Parah Aduma had to be burnt, and then we had ashes from the Parah Aduma. And together with it, there was also the mayim, the water, which had to be blended together with the Eifer Parah. What are these 2 in Yon? The Rebbe says we have to find the shaykhs from this Shir and Rambam to today's day, to the Seder which we are in, to the days which we are in. We have here a combination of Eifer and mayim. What is it as Hasidic terminology? There are inyonim which come mil mayla lamata, and there are inyonim which come mil mata lamayla. Mayim, we know the nature of water is water travels from higher up down. So water goes mil mayla lamata. Eifer is ashes. Ashes is created through a fire. How does a fire burn? A fire burns mil mata lamayla. In Avodas Hashem, we can look at it that there are 2 inyanim. There's the inyan of Torah, and there's the inyan of Tefillah. Torah, as we just mentioned, ma mayim yurdim emokim gavaya lamokim namuch, just like water comes from very high to very low. The same thing, Torah comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Yid becomes totally associated with HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he learns Torah, as the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya Perek Hey, how closely associated we become with the Torah. Who is really Torah? Torah is Hashem. And we become associated with the Chachma, with the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we learn it. And then there is Tefillah, which this is the expression from the one who is davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which this Tefillah is in the format of Milmata Lamayla, from the one davening to expressing himself, tying himself together to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Also in association with the Eibishter. Tefillah stems from the word hatoifel klei cheres, as Chassidus explains, which means tying together, becoming associated, strongly associated, combined. However, it's a combination which comes in the format from milmata lamayla. Same thing we find Benegea, the Rebbe Rashab, whose birthday was Chav Cheshvan. One of his major accomplishments was the fact that he founded the yeshiva of Tomchei Tmimim. And Yeshiva Tomchei Tmimim is known, what it's outstanding for is the combination of Tefillah and Torah. Yeshiva Tomchei Tmimim puts a stress, tremendous stress on Torah, and at the same time puts an equal tremendous stress on the importance of Tefillah and Avodas HaTefillah. The greatness of davening, as we know it's explained at length, in the Siches of the Baal Hayom Aledes and the Siches of the Rebbe Rashab, the greatness of Tefillah. So it's the idea, the association, tying together both of these inyanim, which is the same idea of Parah Aduma. In the Farbrengen of Wednesday night, as well as in the Farbrengen ago and today, I think it was two weeks ago Shabbos, the Rebbe referred to a famous Sicha of the Rebbe Rashab, which the Rebbe Rashab said while after founding the Yeshiva Tomchei Tmimim. And this Sicha is known by the name of Kol Hayotzei LaMilchemes Beis David. Koisev get Krisus LaIshtoi. Based on a Gemara that anyone that joins the Milchama of Beis David writes a get Krisus LaIshtoi, divorce to his wife. The Gemara in Halacha it's explained that when one would join the army of David, in case Chas v'Shalom he will not return, in order we should not have any problems regarding his wife remarrying. So the Gemara tells us at length how a get was arranged in case he does not return. The Rebbe Rashab explains it in the spiritual sense. That Tmimim, in other words, those who are joining the ranks of Tomchei Tmimim, his followers are considered Yoitzim LaMilchemes Beis David. We are involved in a Milchama today as well. And this is the Milchama against those Asher Cherfu Ikvois Mishichecha, those who are having a battle against Mashiach. And we are in battle with them. We are in a war now against those who are Cherfu Ikvois Mishichecha, who are in a battle against Mashiach, but not not just against Mashiach, but ikvis Mashiach. We know now we are in a time of ikvis de Mashiach. In other words, it is the time already when we hear the footsteps of Mashiach coming, and they are fighting Mashiach. What is the duty of a Talmud in Toim Chitmimim? One who has a Shaychus to Chassidus and a Shaychus to the Rebbe Rashab, our duty is to be in a battle to fight against those who are not allowing for the coming of Mashiach, actually. In other words, this is the pshat on Shecherfu Ikveis Mashiach. The Rebbe expressed himself today that this Sikha of the Rebbe Rashab, where he discusses this inyan at length, was said over 80 years ago. And the Rebbe expressed himself that the Sikha is full with inyanim of Ruach HaKodesh. How the Rebbe Rashab is describing and predicting for inyanim which are happening many, many years after he discussed the Sikha. Hey, the Rebbe mentioned that today we have an unusual people who are Chelfu Ikvis Mashiach, who are fighting Mashiach. And this, the Rebbe says, are such type of fighters against Mashiach whom we really never had. In other words, we're not talking about Yidden who are not from. We're talking about people who are putting on tefillin, people who are wearing tzitzis or making a bracha on tzitzis. Naturally, the Rebbe says they cannot deny Mashiach because Mashiach is mentioned in the Rambam. So they have to believe in Mashiach. However, they do not believe that we are now in the days of Ikvis de Mashiach. That we are now in a time which is mamish right before the coming of Mashiach, and Mashiach is about to come right away. This they are denying. And therefore these people are as well considered those who are Cherfu Ikvis Mashiach. They are fighting, they are battling the coming of Mashiach, and they are training children and generations and youngsters that should be their way of thinking. And now, in this generation, we have to be in battle against such people as well. Those who are not believing that already it is the time when Mashiach will come. They believe in Mashiach naturally, but they do not believe that it is right now the time of Ikvis of Mashiach. And this is our inyan now. To fulfill the mission which the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Nishma has put upon us, that we are all Yotzim LaMelchemes Beis David. We are all taking part in this battle, and the battle which is against those who are not allowing for the coming of Mashiach. They do not believe in the coming of Mashiach, that Mashiach is about to come, and therefore their acts are of such which are not proper and befitting how we should act right before the coming of Mashiach. And therefore this is the Melchemes Beis David, which we are all involved in. Here the Rebbe concluded that we are definitely right before the coming of Mashiach. And what we got to do is the fact that we see how Malchiyos Mizgorei Zu Bezu. The Gemara tells us that we see how big nations are being involved one with another and are starting up one with another. All of this, the significance of all this to us should be the fact that it means that here it is right before the coming of Mashiach. Because this is what the Gemara tells us. If you will see a time, it'll come when kingdoms are starting up one with another. To tzape, we have to hope for the coming of Mashiach. And here the Rebbe said, the Chavlei Mashiach, the Tzoris, which it's said about in Svarim, which will be before the coming of Mashiach, this we already had more than enough. And in fact, there's an expression from the Mittel Rebbe, how he expressed himself, Loitokum pa'amayim tzara, that chas v'shalom, there will not be a repeat of a tzara again. So therefore, we had enough tzaras already before the coming of Mashiach. All that we are missing now is that Mashiach should come. And we got to prepare ourselves properly, the Rebbe says. Not that it should be that when Mashiach will come, there will be such individuals who wouldn't be ready, and what they will have to do is they will have to put, quotes often, it's an expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe, that we are really ready for the coming of Mashiach already. But what we have to do is, we have to make sure that the buttons on our uniform are shining properly. Because by soldiers in the army, everything has to be perfectly to the T. So the buttons on jacket of a uniform also have to have the proper shine. So what we are missing now is we have to make sure that our buttons are also shining properly. And not the Rebbe says that when Mashiach will already come, and all of Klal Yisrael is going to be ready to go with Mashiach. Not that then there should be some individuals who will remind themselves that now, our buttons are not ready yet. We have to shine our buttons to be able to join Mashiach. So we have to do all our preparations and see to it that we are all ready for the coming of Mashiach. And the Rebbe concluded with the famous expressions from the Frierdiker Rebbe. La alta le'tshuva, la alta le'gula. It's a famous quotation which the Frierdiker Rebbe proclaimed his first years here in the United States. That by doing tshuva immediately, this will bring to the Geula immediately. A gute Woche.